SOOT and SPIRIT by Kate Griffiths-Lambeth. The fens don't have vistas, they have boundaries. Down here, in the below, everything is horizontal. The black peat soil of Cambridgeshire clings to your boots like a debt you'll never quite clear. The land is ruled by straight lines, drainage dikes drawn with a ruler, endless railway tracks stretching without imagination, sagging rows of flint dash houses where damp creeps 3 feet up the wallpaper, a rising tide that no amount of crown magnolia can ever truly suppress. Even the wind behaves differently here. It doesn't rush or swirl. It travels in long, patient lines across the flat fields, bending the reeds and rattling loose gutters, as though the air itself had accepted the discipline of the land. Arthur lived in the below. He worked in a warehouse where the fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made his molars ache. The building had no windows, only a clock mounted high on a steel beam that ticked loudly enough to be heard above the conveyors. All day he shifted cardboard boxes from one belt to another. Not forwards, not upwards, just across. Horizontal motion. Life on a flat track. The boxes held things he would never see used. Cheap kitchen appliances, packs of novelty socks, quirky mugs, tacky ornaments. They arrived in bulk, and they left in bulk, like water through a culvert. Arthur moved them with practised efficiency, applying sealing tape with a quick, brutal of the dispenser. 8 hours of motion that went nowhere. But then there was the above. In the evenings, Arthur sat in his garden, a square of cracked concrete paving, a flowering currant beside a couple of hardy lavender bushes, an old paint-peeling bird table, and a border of moss, a stubborn green velvet that refused to die no matter how often he scraped at it. He tilted his head until his neck complained, deliberately unseeing the boarded-up pub at the end of the street, or the rusted form of an old Ford Transit parked like a fossil beside the curb, its misshapen tires long since surrendered to gravity. No, he looked past them. He looked at the ship. Ely Cathedral rose like a limestone tanker above the town, the lanterns supporting octagonal tower and the great west tower pushing deliberately at the clouds. From Arthur's garden, it seemed almost improbable, as though someone had forgotten to erase a mountain from a map of flat land. Nearly 1,000 years ago, watched by the silver-bellied eels and the slow brown water of the marsh, men with mud under their fingernails had stood ankle-deep in the mire and decided to build a structure to the Almighty. Not sideways, up! An edifice to God on the site of Etheldreda's monastery, a vast thing of stone and willpower and stubborn faith. The ship of the fens was commanding, proud, magnificent, a towering bluff of oatmeal stone, proof that even this sodden, soaked, heavy corner of England had once reached for something higher. Arthur adjusted his binoculars. His hands, rough from warehouse tape and cardboard edges, were steady. He knew every edge, every ledge of the West Tower now, every jut of stone, every rain-darkened hollow where birds might land. The binoculars had once belonged to his father, who had used them for watching football at the stadium before the arthritis made the stairs impossible. After the funeral, they had sat in a drawer for years, until Arthur realised that they could be pointed somewhere better than a pitch. Last year, the year of 2025, the air had felt different. The above had sent down royalty. A pair of peregrine falcons had nested on the dizzying ledges of the West Tower. Word travelled quickly through Ely, as news does in a small city when it carries a hint of wonder. For a fleeting month, the town had woken up. People turned their backs on Cromwell's house and stood in the cathedral close with their necks craned, watching the fastest animals on earth turn the sky into a killing ground. Children had their phones up as if filming fireworks. Pensioners argued amiably about whether they'd seen the dive properly. Speed, precision, power. Arthur had watched the eggs hatch on the cathedral's webcam. 2 white, downy pulses of life, blinking at the world. Oh, he'd felt a sharp, almost painful joy. See, he wanted to shout at the grey street, look what's possible if you just get high enough. But the below has a cruel way of pulling things back down. A week of relentless, bone-chilling rain, a shortage of prey, a ghost in the blood. The chicks perished in the nest. 2 pathetic bundles of pallid fluff that never learned the secret of the fall. The royal pair had failed. The sky felt emptier afterwards, as though something vital had been quietly withdrawn. Arthur lowered his binoculars and looked back at the eaves of his own house. He had bolted 3 swift boxes there, clean, man-made wooden refuges screwed onto the ageing brick. Swifts were his quiet obsession. To Arthur, they were the ultimate refutation of the below. They never touched the ground, not willingly anyway. They ate in the air, they slept in the air, they even mated on the wing in a frantic, screaming dance. Their lives were written in altitude and speed. Gravity might tug at them, but it never quite won. They were the opposite of a warehouse floor. The antithesis of damp and debt and gravity. They were freedom, made of soot and spirit. But the boxes remained silent. The numbers were crashing. Everyone knew it now, thanks in part to that woman who made it onto the news by walking through London with no clothes on to raise awareness. Even people who had never looked up long enough to learn the difference between a swift and a swallow. The screaming parties, those wild looping chases that used to split the summer sky, had thinned to nothing. Arthur remembered them from childhood, black crescents cutting through the evening light while the adults shouted children in for tea. The air itself had seemed alive with them. Now the sky felt cautious. In a town where the shops were closing and the youth club was a burnt-out shell, it felt as though the natural world itself were quietly giving up. "Where are you?" Arthur whispered to the empty air. "It's nearly May. You should be here." He had spent £50 on a caller, a small speaker wired into the boxes, programmed to play recorded screeches to lure them in. It chirped faintly through the afternoon, a ghost chorus of birds that had not yet arrived. His neighbour, a man whose life was measured in pints and scratch cards, had laughed over the fence. "Giving up your Saturday for a few sparrows, Artie? Rats with wings, mate. They don't bring the money back to town, do they?" Arthur hadn't replied. How do you explain to a man who only looks at the pavement that a bird weighing less than a birthday card has flown 5,000 miles from Africa, crossed the Sahara without ever landing, just to find a specific hole high in a Cambridgeshire brick wall? Some journeys, he suspected, were simply too large to explain. The sun dipped low, seeping apricot and amber over the ooze. The river caught the light like molten metal, sliding between the flat fields and willows. Above it, clouds gathered in slow theatrical towers. As ever, the cathedral stood solid, an umber silhouette against the drama of luminous burning orange. And then, a flicker. Arthur blinked. A dark anchor shape cut across the sky. Then another. They were low, tearing through the estate like black scythes. They didn't flap with the clumsy effort of pigeons. They vibrated, flickering with an energy that seemed to crack the still air of the street. The high squeals split the evening, wild, ancient, utterly indifferent to closed signs on the high street and mould blooming behind plaster. Arthur stood so quickly his chair scraped across the concrete. He didn't care. One swift, a sooty bolt of lightning, banked hard, its wingtip inches from his guttering. It circled once, twice. Arthur held his breath. Then, with a precision that stole it entirely, the bird folded its wings and vanished into the first box. Silence. For a moment, the garden seemed to hold itself perfectly still. Even the wind paused along the fence panels. Then came a soft, rhythmic scratching from inside the wood. The sound of a traveller who has finally arrived. Arthur sat back down slowly. His heart was a drum in his chest. The peregrine chicks were gone. The town was struggling. The below was still heavy with peat and resignation. But Tonight, the above had come home. He picked up his notebook and wrote, his handwriting unsteady in the fading light. 30th April 2026. They have returned. He looked once more at the cathedral tower, now turning pale in the rising dusk. Then he added one more line. Things